Hi all, I hope you're all doing well. In this talk, we're going to be looking at Chapter 5 of Global Strategic Management, and specifically at the idea of designing a global strategy. It's very interesting. It covers a lot of the components of multinational thinking, particularly when they look at the whole world as a potential market, what they look at. So we're going to look at quite a bit of things here, and we'll try to focus on things that are more relevant than others. Basically, when you do a business strategy, you can look at it as a competitive strategy, and it's applied at the level of a business operating in a particular industry segment. Now, when you do a strategy, you're trying to define what the business wants and is able and how it can compete in its segment. The corporate strategy is applied to the level of the company engaged in different business segments. And you have a multi-business corporation. And there you're looking at defining the portfolio of businesses and the corporation wants to operate and a resource allocation pattern among those businesses. And then you have a global business strategy, and that's integrating the various global strategies of all the different markets that the company might want to be in and pull them together into an overall comprehensive strategy. And the global strategy can look at the long-term objectives and identify sort of a value proposition based on the vision they have for the longer term. So, and then from there, of course, you have the global business strategies, build into a business system and trying to gain a global competitive advantage worldwide. It's always interesting to think about what is strategy. We're going to look at the strategy development in a few weeks in a little module, but just a quick thing on it. Strategy comes from originally a military word meant for how military battlecraft is organized and basically conducting military war against other armies. And it was only like in the 50s or so that people started applying the word strategy to the battle of business. And so we use that commonly these days, but originally it was meant for like warfare. And the idea is that where can you leverage your strengths against an opponent's weakness? And I think that's pretty not such a bad way to look at strategy, to tell you the truth. So when you're looking at strategy, you think about fundamental things like what do we want to achieve? Those are your goals. You want to look at your SWOT, the competitor analysis, and you want to come up with ideas. Ideas are again, we'll look at this in a few weeks, but ideas are what you use, your vehicles, to get to your goals. And then you want to test your ideas, and we'll look at a structure on how to do that later on. And then you look at the action steps that will implement your ideas to achieve your goals, and then you review that. So that's the basics of strategy. And again, it's a little quick, but that's how strategy really works. You set your goals, you figure out who and what you are, you come up with ideas to achieve those goals, you test them, and then implement the action steps that'll get you there, and then you kind of review it to make sure it all works. And that's in that next slide, on slide 4, you can kind of see those steps. On the slide 5, you see, and this you see in your book, and how strategy will be different at different levels of a company. And again, referring back to the opening, you have a business strategy, a corporate strategy, a global strategy, and they're really based on sort of the size and geography and comprehensiveness of what you're looking at. A business strategy might be looking at one industry segment or even a unit within that segment. You might be looking at just commercial real estate in Florida, for example, or then you might think of something larger. In all cases, you're following a strategic process. However, what you're looking at is different. So in a business, you're looking at in one industry segment. Corporate strategy, you might be looking at several industries and across industries segments. And then in a global, you're looking at everything. And you'll see I'm not going to read all those to you, but if you look on slide 5, you'll see that there are a lot of commonalities. Again, you're setting your mission, you're doing your goals, etc. But what's different is the size, the comprehensiveness, and the all-encompassment of what you're looking at in terms of what capturing in your strategy. I'll say a quick thing here on slide 6 on business plans versus strategic plans. You'll hear a lot about business plans, less on strategy. It's because strategy is harder. But the business plans are very useful, but they're basically short-term, tactical, follow a model. They're usually when you're already in business, you're identifying your target customers, your target segments, you're figuring out who's going to do it, where are they going to do it, you figure out the operations and that sort of thing. The strategy is really kind of a long-term conceptual vision where you're setting longer-term goals, you're coming up with those ideas, you're looking at least 3 to 5 year forecast and coming up with those action steps. with the strategic plan, you flow into your business plans, but a lot of times you'll see, especially on the entrepreneurial front, a lot different from multinational, people will start talking early on about let's do a business plan before they really set up their strategy. So I always encourage you, and we're looking at this book, is think strategically. The business plans, the tactical things come after that. After you set your umbrella, after you set your long-term, your concepts, and your vision, and your major goals, then you work within that to see how you're going to achieve those, and you get a lot more tactical on the business plans. It's always useful to come up with an operating blueprint. This one is interesting. When I worked at Price Waterhouse for a while, and I used to pitch these decks to different companies on their strategy, and I always liked this look because it often worked very well when I was looking at companies that had global, regional, and local operations, which is often the case. And so the key there is decide, okay, who does what? At what level are different decisions taken? And that's really the key in this kind of operating blueprint. You think, now, what decision will be made at the headquarters on the globe? What will be allowed to the regions, and what will I allow at the local level? And you can see there are a lot of different reasons for that and benefits. For example, when you really, and it's really important to make this very clear. We'll see often in the discussions, and you'll see often when you really look at real life situations in companies, that it's a lack of clarity and communication that creates a lot of the issues around effective decision making and effective strategy implementation. So you need to make sure your roles are clear. So, for example, you have if you're like a major car manufacturer, you'll decide at the center certain things like overall design, the budgeting, the finance, etc., for the global, bond issuances, for things like that. Then you get more regional, and you'll say, well, what cars work better in my if you're selling into Florida, for example, we have a preponderance of SUVs here, way more than you would naturally think, except that we have a lot of water and people like to be above it. But it's way more than if you were in a California where people are mostly driving in long distances and commuting. They want a very efficient, low maintenance, low cost car that holds one person. So you would say that's a regional decision, regional impact on that, and then you get maybe even more local on a certain neighborhood within, or a certain city within that in California, or that might be in the mountains, and then they would go back to SUV. Who knows? But those are kind of things that a decision you have based on where you are. So at the country level, you can get enhanced planning processes. You can get things that are a lot more closely related to the customer. And that's another element of this kind of operational model too. The global model is not intended to be, people don't walk in the door on a global model. They walk in the door at the local level. So your planning and structuring and decision making will be affected by how far away you are from the end customer, the end user of your product. So these are all things, and you'll see all those things in that on slide 7 that affect that. The resource maximization, just a quick note on that. It's difficult in companies to share best practices. Some companies are very good at it because they work at it, and other companies are not. Now, best practices are basically taking what really works in one place and seeing if it could work in another place and applying it. It's very powerful when it works. Many companies don't do that. They work more siloed. People often don't like to share. People aren't encouraged to share. But a lot of companies are the other way around. They say, let's motivate people to share their technology, share their ideas. We'll motivate them through bonuses and through other rewards where they become more visible. And that it can be really used. And you save a lot of time if you can quickly adapt and adopt things that are working well at one place with somewhere else. Okay, on this slide 8, you'll see something a little more practical. When you see you'll see the same model here, but you really see the kind of decisions that are taken at different levels. And this isn't hard and fast by any means, but I found, my experience when I was working in consulting, that this would be often something like this would be applicable. I would take a company and say, okay, let's look, and you talk with the managers and the head people, and they say, where do you stop and start? Where do you want to stop and start? What kind of decisions are intended to be down the line, and which ones are up closer? This could be more like a credit card type company, for example. This one, where you can see I put in a lot of credit card type terminology here, so you can see what they would do if they were like like a headquarters of a credit card, and where they would do on the regional side, and when they rolled it out into each individual country on their credit card issuance and adaptability, adoption of their credit card in that market. Again, an operating blueprint, part of the key is to get alignment. So what you want, and and I use this analogy here of those. If you had water flowing through those things, you would have leakage, or you'd have it all going to the end. And alignment is really hard to do, but it's also very important. You want things to not work in siloed, differentiated, internally competitive structures. Instead, you would like things to really flow, and that comes under a powerful and positively working operating blueprint based on clarity of decision making and clarity of role definition. And the idea there is to just make sure that the effort you're putting in, the talent and the resources and the finance, everything you have as far as resources is used effectively to get the best alignment and the best flow through. When you're in business, you'll hear the word alignment a lot, because when it isn't there, you see this gunkiness and slowness and stop and start element of business that can be highly inefficient and frustrating. This next slide, 10, is talking about global decision making. When you're making decisions on a global basis, you have to have a reason for making certain decisions, and sometimes you start by looking at the big numbers. You look and say, why would I want to do business in the European Union? Well, so you say, well, look at that, man. The GDP is 22% of the world's GDP. The per capita is pretty good. The population's high, and the average growth rate is low. So what does that mean for me? Well, that probably means that there aren't as many young people as there would be in a place where their population growth is high, obviously. So if your product is geared more towards youth, you might look at some place a little more dynamic in terms of younger people. However, if you have a more expensive product for a more mature population, Europe would be a good place because they have money, they're growing, and the population is big enough. So these are kind of things when you just broad brush strokes that you would look at when you're making global decisions. And companies will start with these big numbers and say, what can I do here? Like in sub-Saharan Africa, you see there's a huge population. They don't have any money, so you would think, what can I, if I want to work there? If you were, say, a nonprofit or a charitable organization, your mentality would switch around and say, well, that's where I need to be, because those people need what we have to offer. They need our services because they're a lower income, mass population type location. So you use the same numbers for different purposes, and you might get different results, but it's key to start with a big brush. This slide on 11 is similar in that, except that what it shows is like when you're looking at different industries, where are they active? So you see consumer electronics are really active in Europe, America, and Asia. So basically 90% of consumer electronics are sold in those three regions. But it's different. You could say there are different levels at each one. So you could say that consumer electronics are a little underrepresented in Europe. However, if you were familiar with Europe, you would say, you know what? I don't know. There aren't as many people in America. They're not as dependent. They are much more concerned with how much electricity they use, how much resource they use. There are a lot more. There's probably less upwards flexibility in that number than might just appear automatically when you look at that. Where you see in America, people have 4 TVs, they want to buy 6. It's a different mentality and a different structure, and the prices are so low here that you might say, well, they're going to buy like crazy these things. But anyway, the point is, you start looking at these kind of things to start shaping your thinking, shaping your strategy on what could be an attractive market for what you have to offer. And then, of course, you dig down deeper after that. But at least you look at it and say, let me look at this, and is this an odd? I'll have a hypothesis based on what I see here, and then test it further to see if it's valid. This slide on competitive advantage, I'm not going to go into that too much. I think have a look at that. It's pretty obvious. Basically, competitive advantage comes from the resource you have, the assets you have, different things like that. I don't think that's. I like the slide, and I think it's useful. So read it, but I don't think we'll need to cover it now. It's pretty obvious. And the components of a global value chain. Similarly, again, it's a very nice slide. I think it tells the story. What you see in global, regional, local, the components and where they are. Have a look at that on your own time. I'm not going to read all that to you, but it's the good slide, and it shows where you get your value chain components depending on what location, where you are location-wise. I think this slide on 14 is getting to me interesting because we're starting to look at things that have changed and what's more relevant today. And one thing is the old source of advantages don't matter as much anymore. Manufacturing power, distribution strength, even information flow are just less powerful because they're more more available to more companies. Information flow used to be a big thing. Now everybody can communicate with everybody else very quickly, and even manufacturing power, a lot of things can be made, and the source and the location of where things are manufactured can be shifted quite quickly. Or you might step back and say, I'm not going to manufacture myself anymore. I'm just going to put it out for bids, and people will jump all around the world trying to produce or showing you they can produce what you need for them. So and especially when you get into the digital world, you have the barriers to entry are lower than if you look at Porter's 5 forces, for example. The barrier to entry is one of the forces, and it's not as difficult anymore. However, you can take that different ways. For example, if you come up with a great idea that can compete or in a digital space, and you'll say, well, I'll never be able to compete with Apple or something like that. That may be, but what Apple will do is if they like what they see, they'll buy you. So you can try to compete. You might only want a tiny bit of the market, and that's plenty, or you just get absorbed. So there are barriers to entry. They're different. It's not hard to start. It's hard to stay, and it's not always hard to start. It might be hard to compete. And it might not be hard to start, but it might be hard to keep on going with the offer they give you to take you out. So it's different. That's all I'm saying. The digital world and the power of the big digital companies have made a barrier to entry a little bit more complex. Okay, so, and you can see that on that line there that and I think it's relevant. I think it's good that you have the age of manufacturing, distribution, information, and now the age of consumer and the customer. And I think that's true. That you all are quite, you probably post social media things when you go to a restaurant on Yelp or any number of things on what you like and didn't like. That changes the environment a lot. Where the companies used to think, well, let's do all this, and then by the way, we're going to sell. Now they're thinking, let's make the customer happy, and then back into what we're going to sell and how we're going to distribute that based on what they want. So it's a big change, and it hasn't flown all the way through yet, but clearly there's a much more demanding consumer base where you might want your fresh market delivering your food to your door, your Uber, you get your whatever from your air filters from Amazon because you don't feel like going to Home Depot, and you can wait a couple of days. So we're used to getting things started. We're starting to get very used to things delivered to us and provided for us right where we are at our convenience, which is all part of the age of the customer. This on slide 15 is a traditional product life cycle. You're probably familiar with this from other classes you've taken. But basically, you have the introduction of the product. It grows, it matures, and it declines. As people get tired of it, it becomes inefficient, ineffective, and other competitors come in. That's the traditional product life cycle. Particularly if you went to a new market where when you were growing phase, you had a lot of interest in the product. Other people couldn't catch up to you very quickly. So you had that phase, that time. Sorry about that. That time when you could actually have a run, and it could last for a while. It might last for months, years, or who knows how long. The fact is now that the traditional life cycle is really been squeezed. That product life cycle that used to last for decades might not even last a year. So technology is a reason for this. So as soon as somebody sees something that they like, they're able to copy it. You can't copy everything. Like IKEA, people have not copied IKEA for a lot of different reasons we won't cover here. But basically, it's because so many of their elements are present and strong that it's difficult to copy them all the way through. You could copy them. The model is very simple. Just that they make it all work so well that people think, well, you know what, that's too hard. I can't do all those things. So their product lifestyle, their type of product life cycle has lasted longer than you might otherwise think based on the quality of each of their components. However, it is fair to say that the life cycles are shortened by globalization, technology, consumer expectation, and even legislation allowing things to be transferred much more quickly. The other thing that's happened is that it used to be if a dishwasher or manufacturer came out with a product in the States, they would sell that in the States for a long time. Then when they went to phase 2, 3, and 4 of improvements, they would start selling the original technology to, lesser developed or other types of countries. And that was a model that happened over and over again for many, many years. That doesn't work anymore. And nowadays, if you come up with a product here, people are going to look for the exact same thing right now in almost every market in the world. The target market might be smaller, but they're not going to want your third generation technology anymore. So that shortens the product lifestyle and the usefulness of your design and research and development considerably. The digital impact. Sorry, get back to, we're looking at, what slide is that? Last slide. Yeah, the digital impact on strategy is huge and it's growing. And in fact, it obvious to say that, and it's even hard, but it's very difficult to actually emphasize it enough. The digital-based capability is growing. It's exponential. What's happened, if you look at what's happened from 2014 to 2018, it's grown a lot, but it's expected to accelerate even more to the point where it's really difficult to project or comprehend what will happen in the coming years. You'll see in your careers amazing change and amazing use of technology that affects the way strategy is developed by cutting out and taking away a lot of the pieces that are either obstacles or difficult to overcome, and replacing those with ways to get things done much faster through technology. And you're seeing that happen all the time. And you're seeing sometimes it's not quite like you've all heard of any number of companies called, well, they're the Uber of whatever. They're the Uber of this industry or that. It's an oversimplification, and it doesn't really apply all the time and to what people are doing. A lot of times people use those catchphrases like, let's just like this apply to that. It's not quite that simple, and it's not quite that way. However, it is definitely clear that everything's becoming impacted by the digital economy and affected, and the taking apart of the structures of components of business and strategy and replacing them where you can with a digital solution will just keep on happening over and over again until things become highly efficient. So that's it for that. I think we looked at some good things. The basic things when you're looking at global strategy is take the big picture first. Make sure you see the big numbers, where your industry is, where your company is, where it might fit in. And then once you see those big numbers, then you start exploring a little more carefully and developing a strategy based on testing your hypothesis on those elements. All right. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.